The underestimated Deathworlder. The gleaming spires of Galactic Defense Academy Station Altaris 7 loomed before Elias Chen as his transport shuttle approached the docking bay. The massive structure hung in orbit around a gas giant, its pearlescent hull reflecting the planet's swirling azure storms. Elias straightened his uniform and checked his reflection in the viewport glass. 22 years old, with close-cropped black hair and eyes that his mother always said revealed too much of what he was thinking. He was making history today, the first human ever admitted to the most prestigious military academy in the known galaxy. "Prepare for docking procedures," announced the pilot, a four-armed Varanti whose violet skin glistened under the shuttle's lights. "Human, ensure your gravity compensators are functioning. Station gravity is set to Confederation standard." Elias nodded, though he had disabled his compensator hours ago. Better to start adapting now. Earth's gravity was 1.4 times standard, and he'd spent his entire life under its pull. His muscles, bones, and cardiovascular system had all developed accordingly. As the docking clamps engaged with a metallic thunk, Elias shouldered his regulation pack. Earth had only joined the Galactic Confederation 3 years ago, and the diplomatic corps had fought hard for this single placement. "Don't screw this up," his commanding officer had told him during final briefing. "You're representing all of humanity out there." The airlock cycled open, and Elias stepped onto the station. The lighter gravity immediately made him feel buoyant, as if he might float away if he pushed off too hard. He adjusted his gait, conscious of the dozens of alien eyes tracking his movement. First human cadet, a tall, mantis-like being approached, compound eyes gleaming with what Elias interpreted as suspicion. The insignia on its carapace identified it as Administrator Ketvix. "Yes, Administrator. Cadet Elias Chen, Earth Unified Defense Force." "Deathworlder," Ketvix clicked, mandibles twitching. It wasn't a question but a classification. Earth's environmental conditions, high gravity, extreme weather patterns, diverse and often lethal flora and fauna, had earned it the designation of Death World. Many Confederation species regarded humans with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Follow me for processing. Your anomalous physiology requires special documentation." As they moved through the station's pristine corridors, Elias observed his future classmates. The Galactic Defense Academy accepted candidates from over 80 species across the Confederation. Some floated on anti-gravity fields, others slithered or undulated, and many walked on varying numbers of limbs. They represented the best and brightest from their respective worlds. In the processing chamber, a gelatinous being with sensory tendrils waving from its translucent body conducted Elias's intake examination. "Fascinating," the examiner burbled. Its voice translated through a small device at what approximated its neck. "Endoskeletal structure with calcium deposits of remarkable density, redundant organs, highly efficient respiratory system, and your endocrine system." The being's body rippled with what might have been excitement. "It produces hormones that enhance performance under stress rather than diminishing it." Most unusual. Elias had heard it all before during his admission evaluations. To him, human physiology was simply normal. "Standard cadet quarters will be suitable?" the examiner asked, tendrils quivering. "Yes, with minimal adaptations for gravity," Elias confirmed. "I'll adjust. Your biochemistry indicates potential toxicity to some species. You will need to follow decontamination protocols before shared activities." Elias nodded. The briefing package had covered this. Human skin oils, saliva, and other excretions contained compounds toxic to certain Confederation species. Nothing dangerous in casual contact, but worth monitoring. After receiving his station credentials and room assignment, Elias made his way to Dormitory Sector 7. The corridor leading to his quarters buzzed with activity as new cadets settled in. Conversations hushed as he passed, eyes, sensory appendages, and other perception organs tracking his movements. "So that's what a Deathworlder looks like," whispered a voice behind him. "Doesn't seem so impressive. I heard they drink poison for pleasure. Another voice responded. And their planet has microorganisms that eat flesh from within. Elias pretended not to hear, though his translator implant picked up every word. He'd expected this. Humans were still novelties in the wider galaxy, and misinformation abounded. His quarters were Spartan, but functional. A sleep platform, storage units, hygiene station, and study terminal. The gravity felt noticeably lighter than Earth standard, but not uncomfortably so. He would adapt. Humans were good at adapting. At precisely 800 station time the following day, Elias joined 400 new cadets in the Grand Assembly Hall. The space soared overhead, its ceiling a transparent dome revealing the gas giant below and stars beyond. At the center of the raised platform stood Commandant Zurl, a towering figure with metallic scales and 4 upper limbs. The commandant's species, the Therosians, were among the oldest members of the Confederation. Cadets. Zurl's voice resonated through the hall without apparent amplification. You represent the finest young minds from across the Confederation. For the next 3 cycles, you will train to become officers worthy of defending our shared civilization. The path will be arduous. Many of you will fail. The commandant's gaze seemed to pause momentarily on Elias. We do not care about your planet of origin, your evolutionary advantages, or your cultural heritage. We care only about results. After the assembly, cadets were divided into training cohorts. Elias found himself assigned to Cohort Epsilon, a group of 25 trainees from 15 different species. Their first destination was the assessment center, where baseline physical and cognitive measurements would establish personalized training regimens. The assessment center resembled a massive gymnasium filled with equipment designed to accommodate diverse physiologies. Instructor Vril, a blue-skinned being with 4 eyes set in a diamond pattern, consulted his datapad as Elias approached. Human, Deathworld parameters. Vril adjusted several settings on the equipment. Begin with the endurance circuit. Elias stepped onto a track that changed elevation and terrain as he moved. He started at a pace that felt comfortable, adjusting to the lower gravity with each stride. What began as a moderate jog for him soon had Instructor Vril and several other aliens watching with increasing attention. You may increase speed if able. Vril called out, 4 eyes blinking in different patterns. Elias did, finding a rhythm that pushed his cardiovascular system without straining. By the time he completed the circuit, the monitoring equipment was displaying readings that had drawn a small crowd of instructors. Continue to strength assessment, Vril directed, his voice carefully neutral though his skin had darkened to a deeper blue, a sign of surprise Elias had learned during cultural preparation. The strength tests yielded similar results. What felt like reasonable effort to Elias caused the equipment to register unexpected readings. By the time he finished the full assessment battery, whispers circulated among the instructors. Fascinating, noted Vril, recording the results. Perhaps there's something to these Deathworlders after all. In the following weeks, Elias settled into the Academy's demanding routine. Morning physical training, followed by tactical simulations, theoretical coursework, and specialized skills development. The lighter gravity gave him advantages in certain areas, but the standardized equipment sometimes posed challenges, designed for a wide range of anatomies, but not specifically for humans. During a combat simulation 3 weeks into training, Elias was paired with Nexel, a 4-armed Viranti cadet who had made no secret of his disdain for primitive species like humans. You may find some tasks easier in our gravity, Nexel said as they squared off on the training mat. But raw strength means nothing without technique. The match began, and Nexel moved with impressive speed, his 4 arms allowing for complex attack patterns that would have overwhelmed most opponents. But Elias had been studying Viranti fighting styles, and more importantly, he had the uniquely human combination of endurance, adaptability, and what his ancestors had called combat flow, the ability to enter a heightened state of awareness under threat. When Nexel attacked, Elias didn't try to match the alien's speed or number of limbs. Instead, he weathered the initial assault, conserving energy, studying patterns, and waiting for an opening. It came after 70 seconds, when Nexel's confidence led to an overextended strike. Elias countered with a technique modified from Earth's jiu-jitsu, using the Viranti's momentum and weight distribution against him. The four-armed alien hit the mat hard, surprise evident in his faceted eyes. "Match to Cadet Chen," announced the combat instructor, a battle-scarred Therosian veteran. Excellent demonstration of tactical patience. After that, attitudes began to shift subtly. Some cadets avoided Elias even more studiously, but others grew curious. During a meal period, a willowy cadet with feathery appendages and iridescent skin approached his table. "I am Lyra." She introduced herself, her translator rendering her musical language into standard Confederation speech. "My species evolved on a low-gravity moon. May I join you?" Elias welcomed the company, and soon found himself explaining Earth concepts like rain and seasons to an increasingly fascinated alien. "Your world sounds terrifying," Lyra admitted. "Atmospheric water just falls from above regularly." "It's considered pleasant, actually," Elias explained. "Children play in it." Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the station's communication system. "Attention all cadets. The Sentinel Trials selection begins tomorrow. Qualified third-cycle cadets may register their interest with their cohort leaders." Lyra's feathers rippled with excitement. The Sentinel Trials. They're legendary, a 7-stage survival course through simulated environments representing the most extreme conditions in the galaxy. No cadet has ever completed them in less than 3 cycles of training. Elias's interest was piqued. Has a human ever attempted them? "No human has ever attended the academy before you," Lyra reminded him. "And the trials are only for senior cadets who have completed at least 5 trimesters of training." The next day, during tactical training, Elias approached Instructor Vril. "Sir, I'd like to request permission to attempt the Sentinel Trials." Vril's 4 eyes blinked in asynchronous patterns that indicated shock. "The trials are not for first-cycle cadets, human. Even discussing this is irregular. With respect, sir, I believe my physical parameters and adaptive capabilities make me a suitable candidate. I've reviewed the public records of previous attempts." "Denied," Vril said flatly. "This is not about physical capabilities alone. The trials test judgment, experience, and integrated knowledge developed over years of training." Elias persisted. "Sir, Earth's varied environments have exposed humans to conditions similar to each trial stage. Our species evolved alongside natural disasters and environmental extremes that would be considered catastrophic on many Confederation worlds." Vril's skin darkened. "Your persistence borders on insubordination, Cadet." "Not insubordination, sir. Initiative. Isn't that what the Academy values?" The instructor stared at him for a long moment. "I will forward your request to the Commandant, though I expect it will be summarily rejected." Elias knew he was pushing boundaries, but something drove him forward. Perhaps it was the constant undercurrent of doubt he sensed from many instructors and fellow cadets. Perhaps it was the weight of representing his entire species, or perhaps it was simply the human trait that had propelled his ancestors from stone tools to starships, the need to prove what was possible. 3 days later, Elias received a station-wide summons to the Commandant's office. Whispers followed him through the corridors. No first-cycle cadet had ever been called to meet the Academy's leader directly. Commandant Zerl stood by a viewport overlooking the swirling storms of the gas giant below, metallic scales reflecting the distant light of the system's star. Without turning, the Commandant spoke. "Your request has created quite a controversy, Cadet Chen. I apologize for any disruption, Commandant." "Do you?" Zerl turned, 4 arms clasped behind his back. "I wonder. The Academy training program has been refined over 700 years. It is a progressive system, building knowledge and skills in a carefully calibrated sequence. Yet within weeks of arrival, you suggest you are ready for its most challenging component. I meant no disrespect to the program. Sir, perhaps not, but your request has forced us to examine our assumptions. The Commandant activated a holographic display showing Elias's assessment results. Your physical capabilities exceed our predictive models. Your problem-solving approaches are unorthodox but effective. Elias remained at attention, waiting. The Academy's Advanced Training Council met yesterday to discuss your request. The vote was divided. Zarel's faceted eyes studied Elias intently. In the end, I cast the deciding vote. You will be permitted to attempt the Sentinel trials. Elias's heart raced, but he maintained his composure. Thank you, sir. Do not thank me yet, Cadet Chen. This is not a favor. The trials begin in 14 standard days. No special accommodations will be made for your inexperience or unfamiliarity with Confederation protocols. You will sign enhanced risk waivers acknowledging that failure could result in serious injury or death. Understood, sir. Furthermore, Zarel continued, you will be the first cadet in Academy history to attempt the trials in isolation. Normally, candidates form teams of 3 to 5. You will go alone. May I ask why, sir? Because you represent an unknown variable. The data from your solo attempt will provide valuable insights into human capabilities under extreme stress, and because, Cadet Chen, if you succeed, the achievement must be unquestionably yours alone. As news of the Commandant's decision spread through the Academy, reactions were mixed. Many instructors openly criticized the break with tradition. Fellow cadets formed betting pools on how quickly the human would fail, or worse. Lyra found Elias in the simulation lab, studying environmental data from previous trials. Is it true? She asked, feathery appendages quivering. You're really going to attempt the trials? Yes, in 14 days. That's either incredibly brave or foolish. I'm not sure which. Probably both, Elias admitted with a smile. But I think I can do it. The instructors are saying it's impossible. No first-cycle cadet has ever even qualified to attempt the trials, let alone completed them. Then I'll be the first. Elias projected confidence he didn't entirely feel. The schematics for the trials showed 7 distinct environmental challenges, each potentially lethal if navigated improperly. Besides, impossible just means no one's done it yet. Over the next 2 weeks, Elias prepared intensively. He studied records of previous attempts, focusing on the strategies that had proven most effective for various species. He ran simulations of extreme environments, tested equipment configurations, and developed contingency plans. The night before the trials began, Elias received an unexpected visitor. Instructor Vril appeared at his quarters, expression unreadable. Cadet Chen, a moment of your time. Elias invited him in, curious. I oppose your request to attempt the trials, Vril said without preamble. I believed it demonstrated arrogance and poor judgment. I understand, sir. However, Vril continued, your preparation has been thorough, more systematic than many third-cycle cadets I've supervised. The instructor handed Elias a data crystal. These are my personal notes on the environmental systems used in the trials. Nothing classified, merely observations that might prove useful. Elias accepted the crystal, surprised by the gesture. Thank you, sir. Do not mistake this for endorsement, Vril said, moving toward the door. I still believe you face nearly impossible odds, but if you must attempt this, do so with all available information. He paused. The Academy watches this experiment with great interest, Cadet, as does the wider Confederation. When the door closed behind the instructor, Elias inserted the crystal into his terminal. It contained detailed analyses of the environmental control systems, maintenance schedules, and observed patterns in how the simulations adjusted to different participants. Nothing that provided unfair advantage, but context that might prove invaluable. As he prepared for sleep, Elias thought about what awaited him tomorrow. 7 environments, each deadlier than the last. A challenge designed to push the most experienced cadets to their limits, and the weight of being humanity's representative in this elite institution. No pressure, he murmured to himself, setting his internal clock to wake him at 500 hours. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Defying all expectations, the preparation chamber for the Sentinel trials resembled an airlock, sterile and coldly functional. Elias stood alone, dressed in the standard environmental suit modified for human physiology. A small crowd had gathered outside the observation windows. Instructors, senior staff, and more cadets than he'd expected. "Final equipment check complete," announced the technician, a multi-limbed being with an exoskeleton who had performed the safety verification with obvious skepticism. "Monitoring systems active." Commandant Zoril approached, his metallic scales gleaming under the chamber's lights. "Cadet Chen, this is your final opportunity to reconsider. Withdrawal at this stage carries no penalty. I appreciate the concern, Commandant, but I'm ready." The Commandant studied him for a long moment. "Very well. The Sentinel trials consist of 7 environmental challenges, each with increasing difficulty. Completion parameters are uploaded to your guidance system. You may use the emergency beacon at any time to terminate the attempt." Elias nodded, feeling the weight of the beacon device secured to his wrist. According to Academy records, 82% of all participants activated it before completing all 7 environments. The average completion time for successful candidates is 17 standard days, Zoril continued. You have provisions for 20. Remember, Cadet, courage is admirable, but recognizing when you are defeated is wisdom. With that final caution, the Commandant stepped back. The technician sealed Elias's helmet and initiated the airlock sequence. A computerized voice announced, "Sentinel trials commencing. Environment 1 preparing. Cadet vital signs monitoring active. Emergency protocols standing by." The inner door slid open, and Elias took his first step into the trials. The atmosphere hit him immediately, scorching dry heat that would have overwhelmed his suit's cooling systems if not for the modifications he'd requested. Before him stretched a vast desert simulation, red sands shimmering under twin artificial suns. The horizon wavered with heat mirages, and strange rock formations jutted from the dunes like the bones of enormous creatures. Most cadets approached the desert environment cautiously, spending the first day analyzing conditions and planning routes. Elias had different ideas. Earth's deserts had taught his ancestors that the most dangerous times were midday and nightfall. One for the heat, the other for the dramatic temperature drop. The window between these extremes was precious. He checked his equipment one final time and moved forward at a steady jog, lightweight and buoyant in the reduced gravity. His path took him toward a distant mesa that sensors indicated might provide both shelter and the first navigation checkpoint. In the observation center, Instructor Vril watched with several other faculty members as the human moved with unexpected purpose. "He's not taking time to acclimate," noted a serpentine instructor with translucent scales. "Reckless." "Perhaps," Vril replied, 4 eyes fixed on the monitoring displays. "Or perhaps he understands something we don't. Look at his vital signs, elevated but controlled." As midday approached, the twin suns reached their zenith, and surface temperatures soared beyond survival parameters for most Confederation species. Elias had reached the mesa by then, and rather than seeking shade on its surface as expected, he located a narrow crevice and descended deep into the rock formation. "What is he doing?" The serpentine instructor leaned forward. "The checkpoint is on the surface." "Interesting strategy," Vril murmured. "He's avoiding the peak heat entirely." Deep in the crevice, Elias found what he had gambled on, a cooler microclimate created by the thermal properties of the rock. He used the time to rest, consume nutrients, and review data for the next stage of his journey. When sensors indicated the surface temperature had begun to drop, he emerged and continued toward the checkpoint, having conserved both energy and water during the most dangerous hours. By the end of the first standard day, Elias had cleared the desert environment, a task that typically took cadets 3 days minimum. The second environment proved even more challenging, a toxic swamp with bubbling chemical pools and atmosphere requiring enhanced filtration. Again, Elias surprised observers with his approach. Instead of attempting to navigate around the hazardous liquid expanses, he developed a method to move through them. Is he swimming through the toxic pools? Commandant Zorel had joined the observation team, drawn by reports of the humans' unexpected progress. Not exactly, Vril explained, highlighting the sensor readings. He's using natural buoyancy and controlled breathing techniques to cross distances that would take days to circumnavigate. His species evolved in a world that is 70% covered in liquid water. They developed swimming as a basic survival skill. Remarkable, the commandant admitted reluctantly. But the chemical environment will test more than his physical adaptations. Indeed, the swamp's atmosphere contained compounds that could penetrate standard protection and cause neurological effects, disorientation, hallucinations, and panic. Many cadets activated their emergency beacons during this phase, unable to distinguish reality from chemical-induced delusions. Elias felt the effects beginning after 6 hours in the swamp. A slight disorientation, moments of doubt, flashes of memory that couldn't be real. He recognized the symptoms from his preparation studies. The key was metacognition, maintaining awareness of his own thought processes and recognizing when they became compromised. He paused beside a gnarled vegetation formation, extracted a small device from his pack, and administered the counter-agent he had prepared. Standard issue for the trials. Most cadets saved it for emergencies. Elias had calculated that smaller preventative doses would be more effective than waiting for a full-blown neurological crisis. Adaptive thinking, Vril noted approvingly as they watched. He's not following standard protocols, but his approach is sound. We'll see, said a voice from the back of the observation center. Sub-Commander Thrix, a senior instructor known for his traditional views, had been openly critical of allowing a first-cycle cadet to attempt the trials. The true challenges await him. The swamp gave way to the third environment, a gravity-variable chamber designed to test adaptation to rapidly changing conditions. Here, gravity could shift from near zero to 3 times Confederation standard in unpredictable patterns. The environment had caused injuries to nearly 40% of previous participants. For most species, the key was securing position before each gravity shift. Elias took a different approach, using the variations to his advantage. When gravity decreased, he used the opportunity to cover greater distances with minimal effort. When it increased, he adjusted his posture and movements to work with the force rather than against it. Techniques adapted from Earth martial arts that emphasized centering and flowing with opposing energy. 17 hours, Vril announced as Elias cleared the third environment. He's outpacing all previous records. Word spread through the academy. Cadets gathered around public monitors, watching the human progress through environments that had defeated many third-cycle trainees. Betting pools shifted dramatically, with some now wagering not on whether Elias would fail, but on how quickly he would complete all 7 trials. The fourth environment presented an extreme temperature challenge, a massive chamber divided between regions of intense cold and scorching heat, with survival depending on managing the transition between these extremes. Most cadets approached this methodically, taking days to acclimate to each zone before transitioning. Elias had studied Earth's polar explorers and desert nomads, who had developed techniques for protecting the body during temperature transitions. He modified his environmental suit using materials gathered from previous environments, creating layered insulation that could be rapidly adjusted. When he encountered the abrupt boundary between heat and cold zones, rather than pausing to acclimate, he implemented a controlled breathing technique that regulated his core temperature during the transition. His vital signs spiked briefly, but stabilized far faster than the medical staff had predicted possible. "This shouldn't be physiologically feasible," muttered the Academy's chief medical officer, a crystalline being who specialized in comparative xenobiology. His species must have evolved temperature regulation mechanisms beyond what our models predicted. By the 4th day, Elias had cleared 5 environments, and the Academy was in an uproar. Never had any cadet, even those in their final cycle, progressed through the trials at such a pace. The monitoring center was now crowded with senior staff and faculty from every department, all drawn by the unprecedented data being generated. Sub-Commander Thrix observed the proceedings with growing concern. As overseer of the trials for the past 15 years, he had built his reputation on maintaining their difficulty and exclusivity. The human's performance threatened to undermine everything he stood for. The sixth environment will stop him, Thrix assured Commandant Zurl. The vacuum simulation has broken cadets with far more experience. The vacuum environment was designed to simulate the challenges of outer space operations, near-zero pressure, extreme radiation, and microgravity. The simulation chamber was rigged with obstacles requiring precision movement and problem-solving while contending with these conditions. Elias entered the chamber with cautious confidence. Earth's space programs had pioneered these conditions centuries before Confederation contact. The techniques developed by his ancestors had been refined through generations of space exploration. What the observers couldn't know was that Elias had grown up on Mars colony, where habitat breaches were an ever-present danger. Emergency response drills had been part of his education from childhood. The vacuum environment felt almost familiar. As he navigated the chamber, performing complex maintenance tasks on simulated equipment while managing life support systems, his movements displayed a practiced efficiency that surprised even his supporters. He's done this before, Vril realized. Not in simulation, in reality. Impossible, Thrix countered. His species only achieved interstellar capability within the last century. But they'd been exploring their own solar system for much longer. The Commandant mused. Their historical records show they sent primitive spacecraft beyond their atmosphere before they had achieved global unification or artificial intelligence. Remarkable prioritization. After 32 hours in the vacuum environment, less than half the time of the previous record holder, Elias reached the final checkpoint. Now only the seventh and most dreaded environment remained. The gas giant atmospheric descent. This simulation replicated conditions found in the upper to middle layers of a gas giant planet: crushing pressure, violent storms, caustic chemical clouds, and near-zero visibility. No cadet had ever completed this environment in less than 3 weeks, and many failed entirely despite years of preparation. As Elias rested in the transition chamber between environments, preparing himself mentally and physically for the final challenge, a message arrived from an unexpected source. Sub-Commander Thrix requests final equipment verification before Environment 7 initialization, announced the system. Unusual but not prohibited by protocols. Elias reported to the designated checkpoint, where Thrix waited with a technician. Cadet Chen. The sub-commander's tone was formal, his expression unreadable. Your progress has been noteworthy. The final environment will test more than physical endurance and problem-solving. It will test your character. I'm ready, sir. Are you? Thrix circled him slowly. The pressure variations in Environment 7 exceed safety parameters for standard training. Most cadets require specialized conditioning over multiple cycles before attempting it. I've studied the records, sir. I believe my physiological adaptations will be sufficient. Perhaps, but overconfidence has ended many promising careers. Thrix nodded to the technician. Standard protocols require final calibration of protection systems. As the technician adjusted Elias's environmental suit, Thrix continued. You've impressed many with your performance, Cadet. But some traditions exist for good reasons. Some boundaries should not be crossed too quickly. Something in the sub-commander's tone made Elias uneasy, but he saw no reason to object to the standard safety procedures. After the adjustments were complete, he proceeded to the entry point for the final environment. The massive chamber that housed the gas giant simulation dwarfed all previous environments combined. As Elias stepped through the airlock, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The pressure hit him like a physical blow, far exceeding the parameters described in the briefing materials. In the observation center, alarms blared. Pressure exceeds safety protocols by 40%. announced an automated system. Emergency override recommended. "What's happening?" demanded the commandant, turning to the environmental control team. "Sir, the system shows manual adjustments authorized by Sub-Commander Thrix," reported a technician, voice quavering. "Atmospheric turbulence and pressure have been increased significantly above standard parameters." All eyes turned to Thrix, who stood impassively by the monitoring station. "A simple test of adaptability," he said. "If the human is truly as capable as his performance suggests, this should present no insurmountable challenge." Inside the simulation, Elias struggled against conditions that threatened to overwhelm his suit's protection systems. The crushing pressure made each movement an exhausting effort. Violent wind patterns tossed him about, while caustic chemical clouds reduced visibility to near zero. His first instinct was to activate the emergency beacon. Clearly something had gone wrong with the simulation parameters. But a stubborn determination held him back. The words of his commanding officer echoed in his mind. "You're representing all of humanity out there." Instead of surrendering, Elias drew on everything he had learned, both in his preparation and throughout his life on Earth and Mars. He adjusted his breathing to conserve oxygen, modified his movement patterns to work with the violent air currents rather than against them, and relied on instruments rather than visual navigation. Hour by hour, he made progress, though far slower than in previous environments. His vital signs fluctuated dangerously at times, but never crossed into critical territory. In the observation center, the atmosphere had grown tense. "The parameters must be reset to standard levels," insisted the medical officer. "These conditions exceed safety protocols established by the Confederation Council itself. Interference now would invalidate the entire attempt." Thrix countered. "The human chose this path." Under false pretenses, Vril argued, his skin darkened to midnight blue with anger. "This is not a test, Sub-Commander. It's sabotage." Commandant Zoril had remained silent, watching the monitors intently. Now he spoke, voice cutting through the debate. "The parameters will remain as they are." Shocked silence followed this pronouncement. "Sir," Vril questioned, "if we intervene now, regardless of how these conditions came to be, it creates a precedent that undermines the integrity of the trials," Zoril explained. "However, Sub-Commander Thrix will face a full inquiry regarding his actions after the attempt concludes." The commandant's gaze fixed on Thrix with cold intensity. "For now, we continue to observe." Deep in the simulated gas giant atmosphere, unaware of the controversy surrounding his attempt, Elias fought his own battle. 3 days into the environment, he had covered only 30% of the required distance. His suit's power systems were depleting faster than anticipated, and physical exhaustion was becoming a serious concern. During a brief respite in the lee of a simulated storm formation, Elias reviewed his options. Standard protocols would suggest conserving energy, moving slowly and methodically toward the goal. But at his current rate, he would exhaust his resources before reaching the checkpoint. Then he remembered something from Earth's history. The concept of the sprint finish in endurance sports, where athletes who had carefully managed their energy for hours would expend everything in a final burst of speed. It was risky, potentially disastrous, but the alternative was certain failure. Elias made his decision. After a careful check of his remaining resources, he plotted the most direct route to the checkpoint, a path that would take him through, rather than around, the most violent storm formations in the simulation. In the observation center, his change in trajectory caused confusion. "He's altered course," Vril noted, leaning forward. "That path leads directly into the highest pressure zone." "He's giving up," Thrix suggested, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Heading for the quickest exit point." "No," contradicted the medical officer, highlighting Elias's vital signs. "Look at this pattern. He's not retreating. He's preparing for extreme exertion." What followed astonished even those who had come to expect the unexpected from the human cadet.